Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than anyone. And for over 2 decades, the United States has been locked in an escalating standoff with the Venezuelan government. One that's involved sanctions, sabotage allegations, diplomatic expulsions, and whispers of military intervention. But here's the question nobody's answering clearly. What does the United States actually want in Venezuela? Is it about stopping drug cartels, securing oil, or is Venezuela just another flashpoint in a larger global power struggle that could reshape the entire Western Hemisphere? If you want the full picture, not just the sound bites, hit that like button so this reaches people who still think this is simple. To understand what's really happening, you need to understand what Venezuela is. Venezuela isn't just another developing nation, it's a geopolitical prize. Venezuela has approximately 297 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest in the world. For context, Saudi Arabia has about 266 billion. For decades, Venezuelan crude was refined in U.S. Gulf Coast facilities. American companies like Chevron and ExxonMobil operated there. The relationship was profitable, stable, and strategic. But in 1999, Hugo Chavez came to power. He nationalized the oil industry, redirected profits towards social programs, and cozied up to U.S. adversaries like Cuba, Russia, and China. Then came Nicolas Maduro in 2013. Under his leadership, Venezuela's economy collapsed. Hyperinflation destroyed the currency. Millions fled the country, and the government became increasingly authoritarian. The U.S. response: sanctions, lots of them. The U.S. froze Venezuelan assets, banned oil imports, and targeted individuals in Maduro's inner circle. The stated reason? Democracy, human rights, fighting corruption and drug trafficking. But critics argue the real motive has always been control. Control of oil, control of the region, and control of who gets to be a power player in Latin America. Let's start with the official story: drugs. The U.S. government has repeatedly accused the Maduro regime of being a narco state. In 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Maduro and over a dozen Venezuelan officials on narco-terrorism charges, claiming they facilitated the trafficking of cocaine into the United States. The allegations centered on a network called the Cartel of the Suns, high-ranking Venezuelan military and government officials allegedly working with Colombian cartels to move drugs through Venezuelan territory. The U.S. even offered a $15 million reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest. But here's where it gets complicated. Venezuela is not a major cocaine producer. The coca plant doesn't grow there in significant quantities. Colombia is the primary source. So what role does Venezuela actually play? It's a transit country. Drugs produced in Colombia move through Venezuelan airspace, coastline, and borders en route to Central America, the Caribbean, and eventually the United States. But according to United Nations data and independent drug trafficking reports, the majority of cocaine entering the U.S. comes through Central American corridors, not Venezuela. So while drug trafficking through Venezuela is real, the narrative that Venezuela itself is the primary narco threat to the United States doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Which raises the question, if drugs aren't the main issue, what is? Now let's talk about what Venezuela has that nobody else does in the Western Hemisphere: oil. 297 billion barrels. And here's the thing, Venezuela's oil isn't just sitting there, it's been leveraged. China and Russia moved in. While the US imposed sanctions, China loaned Venezuela over $60 billion in exchange for oil shipments. Russia's Rosneft became a major player in Venezuelan oil operations. Both countries have strategic interests in keeping Maduro in power. For the United States, this is a problem. Imagine the largest oil reserve in the world, controlled by a government aligned with your geopolitical rivals, just 1,400 miles from your southern border. From a strategic perspective, that's unacceptable. In 2025, former President Donald Trump didn't hide it. He openly stated that U.S. oil companies should have access to Venezuelan oil, and that American military presence could provide total security for those investments. He wasn't talking about stopping drugs, he was talking about oil infrastructure, refinery deals, and energy dominance. Venezuela's oil is heavy crude, exactly the type that U.S. Gulf Coast refineries are designed to process. Losing access to Venezuelan oil hurt American refineries, and restoring it would be a massive economic win. So when you look at sanctions targeting Venezuela's oil sector, asset freezes on the state oil company, PDVSA, and pressure campaigns against tankers carrying Venezuelan crude, it's hard to ignore the oil dimension. But there's a third layer to this, one that goes beyond drugs and oil. Venezuela is a piece on a global chessboard. Russia and China. Both countries have used Venezuela as a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. Russia has conducted military exercises there. China has built infrastructure and trade relationships. For the United States, this violates a principle that's been in place since 1823, the Monroe Doctrine, the idea that the Western Hemisphere is America's sphere of influence, and foreign powers shouldn't meddle. Iran. Venezuela has also maintained ties with Iran, another U.S. adversary. Iranian tankers have delivered fuel to Venezuela despite sanctions. There have been reports of military cooperation. From Washington's perspective, Venezuela has become a hub for adversarial powers to project influence right in America's backyard. Some analysts argue that U.S. policy toward Venezuela isn't really about Venezuela at all. It's about sending a message to Russia, China, and Iran. You don't get to operate freely in this hemisphere. It's about maintaining hegemony, about preventing a multipolar world from taking shape too close to home. And if that's the case, then Venezuela is less of a target and more of a battleground, a place where great powers test each other's resolve. Here's what often gets lost in geopolitical analysis: the human cost. Over 7 million Venezuelans have fled their country since 2014, one of the largest displacement crises in the world. Hyperinflation at one point reached over 1,000,000%. Grocery store shelves sat empty. Hospitals ran out of medicine. People died from preventable diseases. And while the Maduro government shoulders much of the blame for economic mismanagement and corruption, U.S. sanctions have undeniably made things worse. Economic sanctions don't just hurt governments, they hurt people. They restrict access to medicine, food imports, and financial systems. The United Nations and human rights organizations have criticized both the Venezuelan government and U.S. sanctions for contributing to the humanitarian crisis. So when we ask, what does the U.S. want in Venezuela, we also have to ask, at what cost? Because the people of Venezuela are caught in the middle of a power struggle they didn't choose. Drugs, oil, or global power struggle. The truth is, it's all three. The drug narrative provides political and legal cover. It's easier to justify sanctions and potential military action when you frame it as fighting narco-terrorism. The oil factor is undeniable. Venezuela's reserves are too valuable to ignore, and U.S. energy and economic interests are deeply tied to access. And the geopolitical dimension is real. Preventing Russia, China, and Iran from gaining a foothold in the Western Hemisphere is a core strategic priority for Washington. But here's the uncomfortable reality. These motives aren't mutually exclusive. They reinforce each other. You can justify intervention on drug grounds, benefit economically from oil access, and achieve strategic goals by pushing out rival powers, all at the same time. The question isn't which motive is real. The question is which one matters most to the people making the decisions. And that answer changes depending on who's in power, what the global situation looks like, and what the American public is willing to support. So where does this go from here? As of early 2025, Venezuela remains under Maduro's control. Sanctions remain in place, and the humanitarian crisis continues. The U.S. has options. Option 1, maintain the status quo. Continue sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and support for opposition movements. Wait for internal collapse or a negotiated transition. Option 2, engage diplomatically. Negotiate sanctions relief in exchange for political reforms, free elections, or oil agreements. This would require compromising with a government the U.S. has called illegitimate. Option 3, escalate. Increase pressure through secondary sanctions, naval blockades, or even military intervention. This is the riskiest path and would face significant international backlash. The Biden administration has shown openness to limited engagement, particularly around oil. But domestic politics, human rights concerns, and geopolitical tensions make any path forward complicated. One thing is certain: Venezuela will remain a flashpoint because it sits at the intersection of energy security, regional influence, and global power competition. So here's the reality. The U.S. wants Venezuela for multiple reasons, and those reasons shift depending on the moment, the administration, and the global context. Drugs are part of it, oil is part of it, and the struggle to maintain influence in a multipolar world is absolutely part of it. Understanding this doesn't require picking a side. It requires seeing the complexity. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture, hit like so this video reaches more people. Drop a comment. Do you think US policy toward Venezuela is primarily about drugs, oil, geopolitics, or something else entirely? And subscribe for more deep dives into the real forces shaping our world, because the truth is never as simple as the headlines.